Good afternoon, everybody. Let me get my notes here. Good afternoon, leaguers and friends. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, who is going to talk about South Bend, Indiana's innovative smart sewer system. This is a subject in which we should all be deeply interested because South Bend, Indiana is in the Lake Michigan watershed by way of the St. Joseph River, which flows through the city and gives this the name South Bend. It's at the south bend of the river. It is also the third largest watershed that drains into Lake Michigan, and South Bend has a combined sewer system, so it's important for the city to come up with solutions to reduce and hopefully eventually prevent untreated sewage wastewater from flowing directly into the river during storm events. Kieran Fahey is the director of the South Bend Combined Sewers Long-Term Control Plan. He is an environmental scientist and professional engineer with nearly 20 years of experience in local and municipal, regional and national government agencies. He is an international technical expert in water quality, including CSOs, also air quality, sustainability, and waste management, as well as European Union and US laws and regulations. He is originally from Ireland, where he worked for the Environmental Protection Agency, Ireland. Regarding his work in South Bend, he is quoted as saying, "Taking non-traditional steps to solve age-old infrastructure problems requires a lot of brazen courage." So please welcome Kieran Fahey.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Lisa, and thanks, Rosemary, and thanks to everybody. I'm honored to be able to speak to you all today on such an important issue as this. When you talk about things like this, and I'll share my screen in a moment to show you a PowerPoint presentation I've prepared, but water quality is considered such a huge area, and obviously in America we have the EPA, we have the Clean Water Act, and we have items specifically in Indiana. And in the big picture, there's obviously we hear a lot and see a lot about problems. But one of the things that we don't really hear about so much nowadays is the issue of what we call CSOs, or combined sewer overflows, and they're massively impactful. It's not a glamorous side of things, but it's the reality of how things are, how infrastructure was built in America in the 20th century, and it's a problem that we're facing now. So while it's not very glamorous, it's hugely impactful and it's very important. And I will share my screen and take us to, everybody can see that okay? Great stuff. Okay, thanks a lot. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is in general, combined sewer overflow. And I'll tell you a little bit about what that is. First, I'll take a little drink of water, sorry. Okay, so like I said, hugely impactful and a huge problem, but the problem is the cost of remedying situations like this, because infrastructurally speaking, cities throughout America, especially in the Midwest, and mostly in the Midwest and on the eastern seaboard, and some older cities in the West as well, like San Francisco, have been designed like this. So it's not necessarily, calling it a problem is a strange kind of way to think about it. It's a remaining legacy of an idea that at the time seemed to be a good idea, because it's, for a long time in the middle of the 20th century, people thought about dilution being a solution to pollution, as the old kind of cliche went. Okay, so what we have in South Bend, we have a combined sewer. And what a combined sewer is basically is it's a sewer system that carries both sanitary bathroom waste and rainwater waste. So therefore it's combined because it carries both those two sources. So you have some level of control as to how much bathroom waste is going to be generated, because you know your population, and you can say, well, if you've got in South Bend, you've got 101 approximately 1,000 people, so you can design a system for that. But the unknown is how much it's going to rain, and because you've got what we call catch basins, or gullies in the streets that also collect rainwater and bring into the system, you can't ultimately design a system big enough to be able to handle both of those, because the rainwater itself is the unknown quantity. So what you're looking at here, first of all, is in South Bend, in the sewer system, if you lift a manhole, you'll see something like this. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today. What the system is, how it works, how successful it's been, and how it's allowed us to develop a new, you hear me talk about long-term control plans, a new long-term control plan to mitigate or to prevent the overflows. And essentially, it's E. coli we're talking about here when we talk about CSOs. We're talking about E. coli into the river. So on the On the left is the view looking down into a manhole, basically, and on the right, it's the lid of that same manhole that has been lifted off. So basically what you're looking at here is a system of sensors, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about a bit about today, because ordinarily in many other cities, you'd lift this manhole and you just have an iron metal manhole lid, and you look right down into the space where it would be where a person could access it to do some maintenance. But in South Bend, we've got a system, a technologically based smart sewer system that allows us to exact to some control over the system. So CSO, before we delve into too much, combined store overflow, LTCP, which I'll talk a little bit about again today, is long-term control plan. So I've kind of covered those definitions already, so I'll just jump through these. This is kind of important because I just wanted to show if you can imagine a time before, and I say South Bend, but this is throughout the Midwest, sewer systems were built kind of neighborhood by neighborhood. There's no one sewer system for a whole city that covers everything. So this system here basically shows that the sewer would have initially been meant to bring rainwater into the river. Whereas if you look at under normal circumstances, on the purple line here, rainwater would flow and sewage would flow into the St. Joseph River. That's how it was meant to be until the treatment plant was built in South Bend in the mid-50s. That's when we built what we call an interceptor. That's the interceptor, which is the line, the blue line across here, which intercepted all these neighborhood sewers, those two are connected by what we call a throttle line here. And that throttle line is what brings the sewage into the interceptor, which then brings it to the treatment plant. So under normal circumstances, if you look at the red lines here, these red dots, rainwater or sewage, combined sewage, would flow down the throttle pipe here into the interceptor, go to the treatment plant, get extensively cleaned, and go back to the river, and it should be fine. But at times when of heavy rainfall, the purple pipe gets too much in there to be handled, and that weir that we see in the middle, where it says CSO diversion instruction weir, that gets breached and an overflow happens and it goes to the St. Joseph River. Now, there are 35 locations in South Bend where this kind of thing happens currently. There used to be more, but because we're working on it through this plan that we have, there's a lot less. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's how to end this relationship really, or this system. So 1994, the EPA issued a policy, the Environmental Protection Agency issued a policy called the CSO policy, and that was read into the Clean Water Act. So it's basically law, which basically says that communities should no longer do this. They didn't say they no longer can do it and they need to stop doing it immediately, but they said the communities have to come up with plans, the long-term control plans to cease this practice. So in 2011-12, South Bend entered into a consent decree for that. Consent decree being a judicial order with courts. Anyway, the plan that we have at the moment, we quickly realized that it wasn't financially, economically, or socially viable for South Bend. It wasn't the best plan environmentally, and it didn't really seem to be affordable for the community as well, based on the resources across the South Bend community. So on the left, what you'll see is who we are and our financial resources. So a little bit about South Bend. Population, median household income, you'll see 35% less than the USA. Per capita income is obviously very low, you'll see there. 30% of households, so 30% of households have an income of less than $20,000. That's pretty shocking. So 1 in 4 people are persons of poverty. And remember as well that sewer rates in South Bend have risen 384% since 2004. This statistic is from 2004 to 2015. So there's a lot being asked of the community. And then what the federal government is basically saying that we need to do is make an investment of $863 million plus the cost of financing that. It's like you buy a house for $200,000. You don't pay $200,000 for the house. Eventually, it costs you $300,000 or $350,000 because of financing costs. So essentially, all this talk, while the clean water aspect is massively important, you have to remember as well that the resources that a community will have in order to be able to complete a long-term control plan. So on one hand, the objective is very honourable and very noble and very important that we have clean water, and that the St. Joseph River, which comes from Michigan, goes back to Michigan and goes into Lake Michigan at St. Joseph, and be treated well. We also have to remember that if the community can't afford for such a plan, then we really have no plan at all. So if you think about that, that's $10,000 per resident, and I just don't mean really necessarily per working adult. I mean per man, woman, and child, basically in the community. So 1 in 5 households would pay 10% of their income on their water bill. That's not including trash, anything else like that. That's just on the water bill. So that's our motivation, really. That's kind of people say, well, why did we come up with smart sewers? Because we had to. We really had no other viable option. So 2015 is when I started with South Bend. When I moved over, my wife got a job at Notre Dame, and we moved over from Ireland. We kind of paused in this job, making capital investments because it wasn't really a viable route to go down, and we started to think about a new alternative plan using the smart sewer network and the data that it had gathered for us. So 15, 16, 17, we devised a new long-term control plan, and I'll talk to you about how we got to there in a moment and how successful it's been and how it's been hugely impactful on clean water. We call that plan the SAGE plan, a smarter alternative for a greener environment, because it's smarter, you use a smart technology, and it's an alternative plan, and it's greener because it uses green technology as well. So that plan went to basically for the last couple of years, we've been negotiating with the powers that be, by which I mean the regulators that are IDEM, Indiana Department of Environmental Management, and the EPA. These are the negotiations that have been ongoing, and also the Department of Justice as well, because it's a federally mandated decree. So many in-person meetings, etc. I won't bore you with the details on that yet, but just to know that one of the impacts of the smart sewer system has been that we've been able to come up with this new plan. Okay, so how the smart sewer system works, and I can show you in a moment. I can open up a little bit on Safari, and we can look at the system itself. But so we've got about 2/3 of the city in South Bend is such combined, and that's would mean that South Bend is 42 square miles in area, 101,000 people, which by standards will say of, like, Manhattan or London, that's very, very sparsely populated, obviously, so that means that it creates an opportunity here, because it means that we have actually got quite a large footprint, and I'll explain to you how that's important in a moment. I suppose in principle, though, it means that it doesn't always rain equally in South Bend across the 42 square miles. So that gives you a little bit of, and sometimes it does, but a lot of times it doesn't. And that's one of our ideas behind this plan. And then 6 rain gauges across the community. And that proves to us the difference across the community and how it gives us an opportunity. Okay, so if you remember from the diagram, and I think I've got the diagram placed. Yeah, I've got the diagram coming up here again. So what we have done basically with the smart sewer system in essence is, if you look at this, at the line that's the throttle pipe that I talked about here, what this does is we left this throttle line in place. So we've done nothing to impact the old system. The old system still works as it used to be, which is fine. But what we've done is we have put in an additional throttle line to connect the existing sewer to the interceptor, and that is the point at which we have control. We've exacted control on that by putting in smart valves. We can open and close, which gives us the ability to regulate the capacity of the interceptor to the sewers that need it most, basically. So if we have 35 of these sewers, sewer basins. Some of them, and before the plan, or before the smart sewer system was enabled, all of those had equal access to the interceptor. So you could have a situation where a neighborhood sewer wasn't raining there at all, normal flow, and it was taking up capacity in the interceptor, and therefore causing upstream less capacity and therefore an overflow. Whereas what we've done here is to say, if your area is not as in need at the moment of this capacity, you get limited. The area that would otherwise overflow gets the access and therefore prevents an overflow. And I can talk to you a little bit about how successful that's been at the moment. So, like I said, with the real-time control, how do we take advantage of that? And that's kind of important here too. So the smart valves that connect the throttle lines that are in the throttle lines allow these. There's a system of sensors in each of these lines, and they all talk to each other, and they can basically negotiate, kind of like a stock market, basically, where one can say, well, I don't really need capacity, so I'm only willing to pay like $1 per gallon for capacity. Whereas another basin might be in dire need of capacity. So it'll, in the algorithm that we have that operates this, it'll offer to pay multiples of that. So therefore, that system will get the access to it. This is a screenshot from, this is South Bend, and you'll see obviously the river, St. Joseph River, coming down from Michigan through Elkhart and Mishawaka and that. Coming along here, obviously, for those of you that don't know, the river flows northerly, basically, coming from the east, which is, to some people, if you're not familiar with South Bend, it seems kind of counterintuitive for the river to flow north, but it goes up north, it crosses the state line again right around here, and goes into the river, into the lake. So these dots here are, the yellow dots are everywhere that we have a depth sensor, so we know how much is in the system at any one time. And then we've got flow sensors, which are the red, and they're mostly closer to the river as well. The rain gauges are in blue, and they're dispersed throughout the community as well. For example, this up, by the way, at the top up here, This is the South Bend wastewater treatment plant. And then the most important ones are the green, and the green are where we have exactly that control. And we actually, it's a dynamic system. So this is like a screenshot in time, but that, we're changing the system every time. Sensors are always being moved, because if you have a year's worth of data from a particular location, you don't need 2 years worth of data. Maybe you want to move that sensor to somewhere else to get further information from that location. Okay, so we maximize capacity, which meant that, by allowing different sewers to have that capacity in the interceptor. So that was one thing. But the real way that we were able to make a difference was what we call hyper-accurate modeling. And so I don't know how much people are aware of some of these terms I'm using. Hopefully I don't want to be either skimming over things too briefly, or likewise I don't want to be going into too much detail on things that are very obvious. But basically, when you're designing a system like a sewer system, or if you're designing, so let's just say you're designing a sewer system, you've got to make certain assumptions, and any engineer will get, you'll get data, but then all that data has to be fed through certain assumptions. So you might know how much it'll rain based on previous weather events, but then you're making assumptions as to, well, how much of that rain will make it to the system? How much will fall on grass versus how much will fall on tarmac, and how much will make it to the catch basin, and how much of that will maybe flow out of the sewer before it makes it to the river, and how much of it, just basically assumption after assumption after assumption. And engineers and scientists, being the way they are, they always will make for safety, make certain conservative assumptions. So you've got a situation where a conservative assumption gets compounded, basically. So it means that you end up with a situation where you've got a fair guess as to what's going to happen in your sewer system, but you don't necessarily know exactly. You could be well off. Whereas with us, because we have this data from the system, we were able to design a plan for South Bend that's been able to save hundreds of millions of dollars, basically, and be hugely successful. So one of the first things that was really useful about the sewer system was it was able to tell us, before, system maintenance was kind of like a bit of an art. Maybe you do something in one area because it hadn't been treated before. Maybe somebody would get a call from a councillor, so that they'd go to a certain area to look and see if there's an issue, or maybe there'd be a backup in somebody's basement and you'd have to go and you'd investigate. But these are all items that, in the first couple of months of the smart sewer system being installed, these are items that were removed from the system. I mean, large nets here, lots of sediment, huge rock here as well. So obviously, with all these things gone, which we didn't know about, we first of all created capacity, and we prevented further bottlenecks. This is one of my favorite graphs here, because basically this shows the success that South Bend has had. And this is, remember, we haven't really built anything in our long-term control plan just yet. We've done some small separation projects, but really most of the work that we've been doing has been in relation to the smart sewer system. So if you look at the rainfall data, which is this line across the top here, this rainfall data, you'll see back in 2007, 42 inches. We got kind of low between 9 and 15. But then look at the last 3 or 4 years, 57, 58, 64, 53 inches of rainfall. So what you're seeing in these bars at the bottom is the actual volume of CSO, combined sewer, that's overflown from South Bend into the river. So look back at 2008, we had over 2 billion gallons with 48 inches of rain, whereas 48 inches of rain. Whereas last year we had 53 inches of rain, and we had less than a quarter of that CSO volume. So basically, more rainfall, 5 inches more rainfall, but we had a quarter of the CSO. That's due to this system. I can't emphasize that enough. That is a success of this system. But look at this stuff for the last couple of years. Isn't it crazy just to see the rainfall that we've had in South Bend since 2016? When I started in 15, I asked somebody at work, what's the average kind of rainfall that South Bend experiences? And they said, between kind of 30 and 40 inches. And that was kind of a guide for a long time, 30 to 40 inches. But that's just been blown off the charts in the last couple of years. Now, we'll have to see 2020 soon. Obviously, we don't have all the data for it yet, but it has been a dry summer. So we'll see how that plays out. Then just to show you as well, another important value has been the CSO. So the amount of CSO goes to the river. Now, remember, we're talking about millions of gallons here, millions of gallons. So 1 gallon would be approximately 750,000 colony forming units of E. coli. So remember that, and we're talking about millions of gallons here. So look back to 2008. We had this is the rain, this is the CSO, and this was the overflow per inch of rain. So we've had a big success in South Bend too by getting that way down to 7.5 from over 42. So that's been a huge success too. And remember, now we haven't spent a whole lot of money just yet. So that's one of the reasons why we're so happy with the system. And the system, I must emphasize too, the system was unique and originated in South Bend, even though now it's been rolled out a little bit further. So talk specifically about E. coli as well. You'll see 2011 annual E. coli from we say all locations. We sample of the main bridges in South Bend. So we sample Logan and Colfax and Angela and Aughton every week. So we've got E. coli data going back years. So 2011 before the smart sewer system and before the consent decree. So 2018 after some work has been completed, after phase 1 of the consent decree work has been completed. But look at the middle year, 2013. So that's a big drop from 11 to 13. And what happened in these 2 years between 11 and 13 was South Bend fully rolled out the smart sewer system. In other words, the real-time control aspect of the smart sewer system. So that's been, the big success and the big reason for that drop. And it's not just hypothetical, and it's not just about sewers. This is specifically about E. coli in the St. Joseph River. So, but there's more to do. Obviously, we know that it's a huge success, but there's more work to be done there. Just a little break slide for a minute, just to show we do an aquatic survey every year of the St. Joe. Because we're talking about plans and models, it always becomes very hypothetical, I suppose, and unreal as to what we're talking about. You have to remember as well that this is a really important this is the backbone of South Bend, basically. This is a steelhead on the left. This is myself here in these pictures, and a long-nosed gar, which isn't that a cool fish with that long prehistoric nose there. Just to make people realize, I suppose, that the river is viable. It is a great river. It's great for fishing and paddling and all sorts of recreation, and that's really the reason why we do this work. So every year, South Bend, in coordination with Elkhart, we do an aquatic survey of the river to basically temporarily catch fish and then weigh them, see how healthy they are, and look for a diversity of species and numbers of individual fish too. So, and the river in biological terms has been improving dramatically over the last 20 years by this metric. So that's just a little aside on that. So how we've been able to get to this plan basically has been, if you see the data-driven maintenance, we talked about all the gravel that's in the system, so that's been taken out. New hyper-accurate modeling, so we've been able to say specifically how we can solve this problem. In the past, all these assumptions led us to thinking that we had to build 7 large tanks to capture this. We now know that we can do that with 3, maybe 4 tanks. So that's a real huge dollar savings for the city of South Bend. Real-time control, when I say real-time control, I'm talking about the smart valves in the system. They've been massively successful, overwhelmingly successful, and beyond our expectations at reducing CSO overflows. And we also have to recognize too that the federally imposed long-term control plan imposed too many infrastructural requirements on South Bend, more than really were needed, and more that were fair for the city of our resources. So what the system has enabled us to do, and I hope you don't mind today, but I decided to talk a little bit more about the successes of the system as opposed to just the nitty-gritty of how it works, even though I can cover how it works as well, but trying to say like how it's been directly beneficial to the citizens of South Bend, and it's something that other communities across the Great Lakes area can do, and many are doing that. It's a very easy plan to be translated. So what we see here in these different columns, current conditions in yellow. So basically, where we are at the moment in a number of different criteria as regards our plan to end the process of combined sewer overflow. So no green infrastructure. No storage tanks, not capturing enough CSO volume, not having a big enough treatment plant, 99 overflows per year, versus when we say current LTCB, this is the one I'm talking about. This is the one that's been imposed upon us by the government. I'm not trying to be down on that. I'm just trying to say we've almost fully negotiated out of this plan. So the middle plan, the orange plan here, 713 million. I mentioned a figure of 863 at the start. The reason why it's 713 now is because we've actually already spent 150 million to implement this plan. The value at the bottom, 3.69%. What that is that's the percentage of median household income of the median household income in South Bend that would go towards paying for this plan. So the SAGE plan on the right-hand side is the plan that we call the Smarter Alternative for a Greener Environment. I haven't updated the slide, my apologies, in the last couple of weeks. That figure, that value of 9 for sorry, I'll come to that in a second. I thought I was wrong, but I wasn't wrong. It's okay. The green infrastructure. So green infrastructure in 9 areas. Number of CISO storage tanks 4. The volume of storage. The volume is a lot less, but it's actually much more strategically placed, and it actually will be much more beneficial, especially if you look at the capture. But what we mean by the capture is how much of those extreme wet weather events are captured versus going to the river. We're almost at 100%. We're at like 99.6% versus 96%. Most important thing here, though, is if you look at the number of overflows, you don't, when you do a long-term control plan, they don't necessarily say, according to the government, they don't necessarily say that you have to never have an overflow again. They recognize that there will be extreme circumstances that will require occasionally that will happen. But with the current plan, which we don't like, 13 times a year that would happen. Whereas with the new plan, which we do like, 3 times a year. The reason why we do like it is if you look at the next row, 713 million versus the new plan of 276 million. So vastly more affordable. It's still a huge cost for the city of Southend, and it's still very expensive, but it's actually affordable. Like when you have a plan that you can't afford, you really don't have a plan at all. But now we have a plan that we can, with a stretch, we can afford it, so we can get this work done over the next coming years. So what does the plan look like that we have at the moment that the Southend Smart Source system has enabled us to have? So it's 4 storage tanks. These would be, the first one would be, and we haven't fully gotten permission to do this, to make this change, but negotiations have been ongoing with IDEM and the EPA the last couple of years, and they're going very well. And we're just talking a little bit about scheduling at the moment. But in overall, I think we're going to get to do this. So storage tanks. So there's times when a smart source system will not do everything. So there are times when in extreme rainfall events, like if you get 7 inches of rain over a day or two, you're going to need to build your way out of that kind of a problem. You can't just do everything with technology. You've got to be able to build storage tanks, that kind of thing. So we recognize that, and these are the locations. Now, they're not necessarily on these parks, they're in that area. So, in the area of Memorial Park, in the area of Randolph and Sampson, and the area of Brownfield Park, we recognize there being a need to build storage tanks for those areas there. Also, increasing the capacity of our treatment plants, because remember, the bigger your treatment plants, your wastewater treatment plants, well, the more CSO you can, and the faster it can treat, the more you're preventing it from going into the river, obviously. So that's going to be hugely beneficial as well. And then what we're calling a South Shore Interconnect is basically a new part of a sewer system that we feel like in Southend we need to build, is so that we prevent kind of an anomaly of the system, which I won't go into a lot of detail, but it crosses the river in a few too many places, and we're going to take that out because it's kind of a bottleneck and environmental hazard. Community support as well is very important, because when the last plan was agreed to by the powers that be in both the federal and in the local Southend government, there wasn't really any community. I wouldn't even say, it wasn't a situation where there wasn't support for the plan. There wasn't even awareness for the plan, which is a problem, because at the time, people in public works went to the council, and they kind of said, they started the conversation at the point of, well, we need to raise rates because we need to do this plan. And that was the wrong way to start this process, because when we redesigned this plan, we decided that we need to take the community along with us to a large extent, and make sure that there was buy-in on this new plan from the start, so that people weren't going to be shocked at the end when they were told, oh, this is $1 billion plan in Southend. Anyway, this is a list of the communities that we've been lucky enough to support our plan, and it's great because especially some of the purely environmental non-governmental organizations, to be able to say that we agree with the work that Southend has done has been really great for us, like the Friends of the St. Joe, the Nature Conservancy, the St. Joe's River Basin Commission, and Shirley Hines Land Trust, people like that have been able to say, we agree that Southend is doing the right thing here by doing a smart sewer system, which will create a much cleaner river for the city and for the residents. Again, from the perspective of community involvement as well, public meetings since 2015, 19 public meetings. I think we've actually had one since, so that's been 20 public meetings. Meetings that have been advertised and have been held either in council chambers or in a public location, such as like one of our parks, or in the Morris Bistro or something like that. And then published 21 articles and stories between local newspapers and TV as well, just to get the message out there. And it's good. People are becoming aware that Southend is doing things in this field, and that's been super beneficial for us to be able to portray the success that we've done in a way that the IDEM and EPA have to stand up and say, this is a really good idea, and Southend should be able to do something, should be able to continue going down this route and continue with the successes, because when you look at the the impact we've had on the river, not just in relation to CSO frequency, but on the E. coli impact as well. We want to be able to say that other communities across Indiana and the Midwest as well that feed into the Great Lakes and even into in the Mississippi watershed as well should be able to do what South Bend has been able to do easily, to be honest, and have an impact that's massively impactful on the river, but also on the community as well. So this new plan that's been entirely based on having a smart sewer system, because the smart sewer system, I have to emphasize, isn't just about day-to-day operations of the sewer system. It's all been about 10 years worth of data that it's mined. So in the past, like I mentioned, if you had you're modeling a source system to design a source system, it was based on that assumption approach I highlighted. Whereas now, if you're going to get great amount of rain, we know based on past experience and past data that we've been able to gather, we know how that's going to be, how it's going to happen, how it's going to affect our source system. So basically, that allowed us to create this new plan, which is more beneficial, but much less expensive. So if you look at it, $437 million less expensive. Now, I don't like to say it's a saving of $437 million because it's $437 million that we didn't have anyway, but it's that much less expensive. It's got much better capture. So in other words, capturing much more of that CSO that would go to the river. The E. coli will be 12% less than it would be in the previous consent decree, and like 100% better than what it is currently. Less community disruption. In other words, if you in the past plan, they had us building tanks on. I'm sure how well everybody's familiar with South Bend, but they want us to build tanks on, say, some of the flagship parks in South Bend, Howard Park, Leaper Park, places like that. Whereas now we've taken that out of the situation. It's not going to be impacting these two flagship parks of South Bend. So that's a small but majorly impactful thing as well. And it's been developed with community support in as much as possible. So so basically, like I said, the mining the data from the source system for the last couple of years gave us an unprecedented level of understanding of our system. And that's the key difference between, that's the key thing that it has delivered to us and has enabled us to do. And that kind of brings me full circle again to take you back to the sensors in the ground as well. And if you'd like to just bear with me for a moment, I can just go into the system just briefly. I won't make any changes, but I'll just show if everybody's willing to do that. I think I've got it open here. Okay, so if everybody still sees my screen here, basically this is it live at the moment here. They call it Blue X. Basically, so a little bit of a background. The system itself wasn't created by South Bend, but it was in a way too. So basically what happened was a bunch of researchers from the University of Notre Dame back in the mid-2000s had an idea, but no real way to apply it. So they brought it to South Bend, public works representatives at the time, and they used South Bend as kind of the sandbox, as people call them nowadays, for these kind of projects. They call it CSO net at the time. So CSO, combined sewer overflow network. And that basically eventually grew into a private company, a company that was spun off from the university, and that company is called MNet. And MNet are still based in South Bend, and they've recently been acquired by a multinational stock exchange level company called Xylem. So anyway, the whole thing is going really big. It's been very successful. That's why you'll see this branding here on the corner called Blue X. It's kind of like their style. Anyway, so we can look at various different CSO. These are all sensors throughout the system. So you see Beck's Lake, Bowman Creek, all different CSO locations, then rain gauges, different stormwater ponds as well. And these are all, and then you can basically, if you wanted to select a CSO, so you could say select CSO 4 and you could go to depth, and then you look at today. So for example, here, when you hit get data, and you can see basically today being a very dry day as well. The flow is very low at CSO.
Kieran,
yeah.
We're still just seeing your slideshow. We're not seeing anything different.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. 1 second now.
We're just seeing the two sewer taps.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing right now, and I'll just start to share again. I know we're pretty running out of time, so I'll just try and do this. Let me see.
We don't want to hurry you.
No, okay, let me see now if I can. Anything now?
No, not yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just try to share one last time. If that doesn't work. Okay, how about now?
Well, something's happening. EMNet time.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Sorry about that. I didn't realize. Sorry, folks. So I'll go back a little bit just to show you. This is the live portal for the smart sewer system that we're looking at the moment, and you can all see this area sensors. You can see Blue X. So basically, this is the system as it is at the moment. So we've got over here on the left-hand side, you'll see certain locations. So levels, Bowman, Beck's Lake, Bowman Creek. These are all CSO. This is combined sewer overflow. These are the sensor locations. So you won't see a lot today, but you will look at, say, just pick out one here. Let's pick out CSO. Let's pick out CSO 6 and see if anything's happening there. So I click on that, and then I can go to depth. And then if I look at get data, you'll be able to see the CSO volume in feet, basically. So this would be, if I look at, maybe we'll see, basically, we haven't had a really interesting event in a long time because it's been pretty dry recently. But this is all the specifics. This is how the system operates. We're looking at here. This is the system right now. And I'll just see if there's anything that would be beneficial as well. Trying to look let me see, wastewater treatment influent. We can see that. Okay, we're just looking at anyway. Let me see. So you've got river crossings. These are the where the sewer system crosses the river. These are the stormwater basins, Kennedy Park, Kensington, Oliver Plough Basin. The CSO ones are the points that we're monitoring. We have the ability to, while we have the ability to exercise a level of control over the system, the best thing is actually that we don't actually apply a level of control over it, that we allow it to control itself. In other words, we allow it to interact with itself and work according to the algorithm on which it's based. In other words, meaning that the areas which are in dire need of capacity are the ones that get it. In a day like today, when it's, I mean, it did rain last night, but it's been fairly dry today. It's been very dry recently. The smart sewer system is really just gathering data and not actively controlling anything at the moment. But if we were to get an inch of rain tonight, that's when everything will click into place. And that's when all the valves that connect the sewers, the neighborhood sewers, the interceptors start to open and close and direct flow appropriately across the whole community. So that's basically it. I'm open to hopefully if anybody has any questions for me, hopefully I've piqued some interest. I hope I hit on some interesting points today too. I know that it's one of those things that it's not very glamorous, but like I said at the start, it's hugely impactful. It's much more impactful than you might think, because it's not like a one-off event like an oil spill or might cause a fish kill or something like that. This is something that happens, that infrastructurally has been designed in this way, and it's something that goes on kind of unseen in hundreds. I think it's maybe over 700 communities in the States that they have this kind of not a smart sewer system, but they have this combined sewer system that is just continuously bringing E. coli into our rivers, which is continuously bringing it into our lakes as well. So that's kind of it for me. Hopefully, I tend to talk too fast, so hopefully I didn't today, and hopefully everybody was able to get a sense of the kind of work we've done in South Bend. And if anybody wants to talk or have any questions for me, that'd be great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Kieran. That was great. It's definitely kind of a complex system that's great because it maximizes your efforts to keep the water from flowing into the river untreated. So we do have questions. I will give you the first one. Krista wants to know, we often lobby our Congress folk for sewer and water revolving funds. Can you comment on how helpful they are to a municipality?
So the state revolving funds and part of the Clean Water Act, which we would get in Indiana through the Indiana Finance Authority, are very impactful to communities like South Bend. At the moment, a lot of it will depend on where interest rates are at the moment, though, because if you can go to a bond market and you get better rates, it's much easier to do that because there's certain requirements, very, very difficult requirements about applying and getting state revolving fund loans. That said, usually you'll get the state revolving fund loans, the sewer loans from the Finance Authority are at around like 2% or something like that. So usually they're very beneficial. It's essential though that, every couple of years when there's a rewriting or change to the Clean Water Act, and it's pretty much every year, it comes up to play for one of these things. Will the SRF funding be maintained or not? And it's essential that it be maintained. I mean, funding is great, but the one thing about funding is what's better is grants, really, isn't it? To be able to get these things done without having to have the residents pay for it. But yeah, I mean, we're looking at, when we build these plans, we're financing them in a couple of main ways. Either the state revolving fund from the Clean Water Act, like you've mentioned, or bonds, and then also raising rates as well in the community. So, I mean, the raising of the rates will happen, kind of has to happen anyway, because either of those two mechanisms would have to be, obviously the money would have to be paid back. But it's essential that those items remain there. Yeah, we were hopeful for more infrastructure, kind of a more kind of federal infrastructure kind of approach over the last couple of years, and it didn't seem to have kind of trickled down to us at this level. But it's important that the SRF funding definitely remains. Yeah, it's hugely valid for us, vital.
Great, thanks. Barbara, do you have any more questions? You want to do the next one?
I do. Excuse me. What kind of info do you give at the public meetings, and how many people would come out when you were starting all this?
So it depends. We created what we call a CAC, a Citizens Advisory Committee, and the Citizens Advisory Committee has maybe 40 members based on, some people would be, for example, we've got a couple of like either active or retired professors from Notre Dame that are interested in water quality, and some people would be active from the point of view of accountants. Some people might be planners. Some people aren't professionally trained at all, but they might be very passionate about, they might be paddlers, kayakers that use the river frequently. So also then we've got some people that would consider themselves kind of like captains of industry in the community as well. So we've had a lot of diverse conversation. We've had people, some, one particular member, I won't mention names, but first of all, everybody's been great and very helpful to us. But one particular member who's a very successful businessman, worth maybe in the tens of millions of dollars, he would be adamant that this is all about money and this is all about, we've got to, at every cost, we've got to, if we can get this plan for $1, we've got to do that. Whereas on the other hand, you've got people that are, canoers and paddlers, and they're saying, hey, we need to spend something. We don't need to spend $1 billion, but we've got to recognize that we have to spend a couple $100 million on this. So I was then tasked with the difficult job of trying to somehow stay between those two, book ends of the spectrum. But as regards number, and I think we've managed to pull it off well, because not only have we brought the cost down by over $400 million, but we've brought the environmental impact up by however you want to look at it, either in E. coli percentages or frequency of overflows. But as regards numbers, it would always vary. I mean, at the start, so we'd have the CAC, which is the Citizens Advisory Committee, and they would be, if you have 40 members in that, maybe you'd get maybe 30 people at that. They would be the committee, and they'd be the ones that we would principally address. But then we'd also have people in the room as well. We did a lot of these meetings in three main places. They were either in the basement of the Morris Bistro, which was a little depressing, to be honest, because it doesn't have any windows and you can't like see the river from there. So we changed it to Howard Park, which the old Howard Park wasn't great because the room there was a bit small. So then we started to use the street department. The street department in South Bend is down by the sewer, streets and sewers. That's a little bit of not a great room either. So then we started to use the council chamber too. And we basically, it depends on, the meetings will be well advertised. You may get anywhere from, we would get like anywhere from 20 to 50 people at it. At the start, we would get a lot of media as well, which is good because we wanted to get the message out there. And then as people started to get a bit more confident that we were able and we were looking like we were going to be successful, people got less concerned. But at the start, there was a lot of interest in this and across the community here, a lot of both pressure to do one way or the other, and then a lot of anger as well, with the perception that's what has South Bend been doing? How did you get yourself into this kind of problem? And isn't the city in enough debt at the moment? How can we possibly go into this? How can we possibly spend more money on an issue like this? And then other people saying, well, South Bend is only here because of the river, and the university is only here because of the river, and we've got to protect it. So, I think back to my point, I think we've kind of walked through the middle, and we've been able to give everybody a little bit of what they wanted. And I think we're happy with that success so far. And I think, hopefully over the next coming weeks, we're going to be going back to the council to say, remember, all that we talked about, well, we've pulled it off and here we are, and I want to get your support. And the council have already given us an endorsement of this work too, which something that hadn't really happened the first time around when this has been negotiated in 12. But I think that we'll be in a different situation this time when we're able to say, look, we've done our best. We've got the best plan that we can realistically get, and we really hope that the community stays behind us on that. So the interest has been good and it's been beneficial. Thanks.
And the fact that you used all those groups, I mean, that was so important. You had this group behind you and got everybody involved.
Yeah, and at times, it's awkward at times going to these groups and I was new and new to the country. I just moved here in September of 15, and we had the first meeting in October of 15, and just the passion verging on anger, it was stressful at times, but I think, I did a lot of after meeting kind of follow-up meetings with people, people had any particular questions that I felt, sometimes in a meeting like that, you'll have a dominant voice that'll take over. So I wanted to make sure that everybody got heard. So just even small things like meeting members of the committee for like a coffee or a hot chocolate, and just talking to them for an hour or two and saying, like, asking them everything they wanted to be involved, or that they wanted to portray, what problems they perceived, and a lot of the times, people just wanted to be listened to, and I think that, I think we've done a good job so far. But that's not for me to say because I did it. But hopefully history is on our side when it comes down to this.
Can I ask you what brought you here? Was it the job or was?
No, no, I was very happy living in Ireland. My wife got a job in Notre Dame at the university back in 14, and then I had to go through like the green card process then. So I was in Dublin for an additional year, and I moved over here then once I got the visa stuff sorted, and I moved over here in 15. We've been living in South Bend since when was it? September of 15. So just over 5 years.
Awesome. Well, we love listening to you and your
Thanks.
accent. It's like we're there.
Thanks. Good to hear.
Thank you.
Thanks, not at all.
Lisa, it's on you.
All right. Alex asked, is there any effort to address gray water, and does the potential redirection of gray water help sewer flow and capacity?
Well, it does, but not enough, basically. Let's talk a little bit about, first of all, about, say, rain barrels, for example. One of our early meetings, somebody had mentioned to us, well, can't we just get the rainwater out? And that's a very good idea. Like, if you can get the rainwater out, you can prevent so much of the CSO. We did a study on that, and we realized that we'd have to have between 16 and 20 rain barrels per home in South Bend before we'd have an impact. So can you be impactful with less? Definitely, you can be impactful with less, but not always. So the idea of people having 16 to 20 rain barrels in a house is absolutely, it's crazy. It's not really feasible at all. So one of the things with this plan, if you remember one of the slides I had where I talked about green infrastructure, we didn't have any green infrastructure in the original plan, whereas now we have it in 9 of the 35 basins. So while I'm an environmentalist, I'm very kind of practical about where we can apply kind of green infrastructure and look at grey water. Sometimes it's very easy to get very passionate about green infrastructure and want to apply it across the whole city. But what we realize is that there are certain places in South Bend where green infrastructure or harvesting or recycling of grey water will have no impact at all. But there's some areas where it will be hugely impactful. So because we have the smart sewer data, we're able to show, for example, there's some basins where the gap between, if the amount of capacity you will say in a system is here, but the overflow is way up here, that gap is too big to be bridged by simple approaches with the grey water recycling and things like that. So that's where you need a smart sewer system, and you need to be able to build, grey infrastructure like concrete tanks and tunnels and that. Now, that said, of the 35 basins that we have, there are 9, definitely 9. There are at most 9. There are definitely 3 where the gap between the capacity and the overflow is just right there, and that's small. And those are the areas where we know we can build our way out of this with green infrastructure. So there's somewhere there's just no point. You could put in all the rain barrels, the smart streetscapes, you could do bioswales, you could do whatever you want to do, downspout disconnection, all that, and it won't really have an impact. But there's certain areas where a little bit of that will end CSO overflows. So that's becoming a cornerstone. And when we came up with the name SAGE, we wanted to make sure that was included in it too. That's why the smarter alternative for a greener environment, because it's greener, not just that it's for a greener environment, but it's a greener plan because it has green infrastructure in it, whereas we didn't previously. But we had to say that we wanted to do it in not just a passionate way, but in the most kind of pragmatic way possible. So we know specifically, a couple of years back, we got, it was summer of 19, we got a bunch of interns from Notre Dame and IU, SB, and different places around, and they did a study for us where I'd highlighted the areas where the green infrastructure should go, but on a large scale. Like, I knew the basins, but these interns, which were university kids and college students, and some of them were high school students as well, they walked every street, every alley in these areas, and they'd say, hey, there's a place here where there's a street here with no trees. There's an alley here that we could do something with. There's a park here that we could take out the curbs so rainwater could flow into it. So we've got these ideas, and it was great because it didn't really cost much at all to do that. And we have a green infrastructure master plan design now for the city that I'm just completing at the moment. Hard to complete it because the negotiations are still ongoing, but it's going to be a cornerstone of the new plan as well. So great question. Thanks.
That's great. It's so cool to see that you had so many people involved in
Oh yeah.
the creativity process. So I think that's great because I think it really helps come up with, a variety of things that you can do. And like you said, actually getting out on the streets and seeing where things can happen is key. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
great. Thank you.
That's all.
Barb, do you have another?
Yeah, I got a couple more. Kieran wanted to know how many other municipalities are involved in this technology, specifically Indiana or other places that you know of? Are you the
So-
original?
We're the original. Yeah, we're the original and first
Okay.
because of the university, because of Notre Dame, and because that's where the professors, or they weren't professors, sorry, they were like postdoctoral researchers, and they use South Bend as kind of the sandbox. They've had a lot of success. They have probably, and they're a different company, so I don't know the ins and outs of everybody that they work with, but I know that they work with. I'm pretty sure they're doing some work with Elkhart. I don't think they do work with Mishawaka. As regards the bigger picture, regionally, they've had, well, let me see, Kansas City. They've been very impactful in Kansas City. They've had a huge impact in Buffalo, New York. They've had a lot of success in Buffalo, New York. They're also involved in doing work in San Francisco, which is particularly cool because, you're taking, San Francisco is meant to be the epicenter of cool technology, but yet you've got somebody from, the Midwest bringing IT technology to them. So they've had success there too. I'm guessing they'd probably be in at least 24 cities across the country, but they're not the only ones that do it now. They've got some competitors out there too, but the Mnet are kind of still the biggest ones around that do this. But there's a lot of potential for their work because I think there's something like, I read a number of 706 cities recently. I'm not sure if that's still the most accurate number of cities in the country that have a combined sewer. So there's still a potential for a lot more to do it. I know that they've done some work also, in Grand Rapids as well, and they've had a lot of successes there. But specifically, I know then that we've also had people come to us because we've been the original ones. A lot of different municipalities will come to us and they'll ask us, like, they'll have gotten, I suppose, to be honest, a sales pitch from the company, and we'll say, well, this is specifically how it works. So we've had Hampton Roads Sewer District, which is the district down in Virginia Beach. They visited us recently. Chicago have been out to us a good few times from the metropolitan area. I can't remember the full title now. We've probably had in the last couple of years, we've probably had a dozen different municipalities come visit us that are interested in doing this kind of work. But there's more potential for a lot more to do it. But the thing is, just to add one point as well, you can't just put this system in and get results straight away. You have to. The thing about the system is, you put it in today, you get results in 3-4 years' time. You can get some results straight away in regards maintenance and seeing your hotspots and avoiding sewer backups. But if you want to design a plan that's going to really eliminate CSOs, you need time. You need seasons and seasons and seasons before you can really understand how your system works, because systems are so just weird and different. They're sewer systems. They act strangely.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering if you were the guru, so to speak. So if others were following in your steps, if they kind of came back to you and said, hey, what happened with this? Or how did you deal with that issue? Or
yeah, we've had a lot. And even we had a lot of interest from, not just from cities as well, but EPA. They've come to us from an IDEM as well, but mostly EPA. Anytime when they're writing guidance documents on this emerging technology, the South Bend has been featured prominently in that kind of stuff as well. And we've been given tours and presentations on this for a long time because we just like the idea that we're one of the first to do it, and we've had a success, and we kind of enjoy just getting the word out there that there's an opportunity to make some savings.
Thank you so much.
That's all.
Yeah, I know there was a NPR actually had a piece on the smart sewer system in 2018. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I was actually on that because that's one of these that's been it becomes like a podcast, and while NPR isn't available at home in Ireland, some people get the podcast. So I had people contacting me and be like, what the, it's bizarre. I was listening to my NPR podcast and I heard you in it. So yeah, that was 2 or 3 years ago. That was really cool. Yeah.
Great. I can put that link in the chat if people want to look at that, listen to that. So there was a question for Krista wants to know, will South Bend be released from the consent decree when overflows reach 0? And how does that work?
So the way that it works would be that the CSO policy of 1994 says that you can comply with the policy in one of three ways, basically. You can capture 85% the volume of wet weather flow. In other words, 85% of that which would otherwise go to the river. And if you do that, you're in compliance. Otherwise, you can reduce your overflows to 4. They allow you 4 overflows, and that will give you compliance. Otherwise, what you can do is you can reduce your E. coli to the level that would otherwise be achieved by 4 overflows per year. So basically, zero isn't really, even in systems that are totally separated, you can have an overflow. So you're not obliged to go to 0. They will let you have some for extreme events. But it's a good question though, because really what you're saying is, what happens after your consent decree? What happens with your long-term control plan? Basically what happens would be you're given, they're called long because they are long, they're 20 years long. So you'd be given 20 years, let's say, to do the project. And then at the end of the project, into the plan, when you've got everything built, you've got about 2 years perhaps to do what they call post-construction monitoring. That's when you've got to say, you monitor intensively to say whether or not your plan has achieved its objective. Now, 2 things will happen at that stage. Either it did and you're done and you're in compliance, or it didn't and you've more work to do. And if you've more work to do, that'd be fairly depressing because you might have spent $1 billion at that stage. So you'd be very hopeful that you would have done enough to be able to, be in compliance. Now, there's a third alternative too that you could do, which could be that they might say that you're not in non-compliance and you're not compliant. What they do is have a thing called a use attainability analysis, which basically means that they'll say that under extreme events, I'm talking about extreme events, the time when you have a foot of rain, a foot of snow that melts and you've got 4 inches of rain, they might say during those particular events, that only happen like maybe once every 2 years, they won't enforce the E. coli limits on the river. They might give you a certain allowance because they recognize the fact that it's, kind of force majeure and that nobody is going to be, at that time, nobody would anyway be, fishing or swimming or drinking that water. So that's, you'd prefer obviously to full compliance, but there's kind of a little bit of gray area there where they say that you would be able to have a little bit of an asterisk beside your compliance.
Great. Looks like we're actually at the top of the hour here. If there are people who want to hang out and Kieran, if you're available, we can do some more questions, but just want to thank everybody for coming today. Rosemary, did you have something you want to say before we pop into more questions?
Just thank you to everybody, and we hope that most of you will be joining us tomorrow for day 2 of our conference. So thank you. And I'm staying if Kieran can, because there are a lot of questions in the chat box.
Good.
Great. Barb, do you have a question for him?
I do. My question was, who's in charge of the controls? Like, we have these 100-year rains that happen about every other week sometimes in the summer. And I was just wondering, when you showed us all the different symbols for the different sensors, who kind of controls, or who keeps an eye on them, or how does that work?
So a number of different things. First of all,
Drink your water first.
No, I find things. So the system is best run without human interaction for starters. In other words, it's best working on its own algorithms to work out where capacity should go. That said, the data that I just showed you in relation to the control screen, that's controlled by at our treatment plant. There's a system called SCADA. If you're not familiar with SCADA, it stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. And it's kind of like when you see in a movie, if you see a picture of like a nuclear power plant and there's 2 guys in a room and they're looking at all these screens and monitors and there's all these flashing lights. It's kind of like that basically, where they've got an ability to see and control what's happening in the system. So that's all fed into the operators at the treatment plant. And there's always operators at the treatment plant, 24/7, 365 days a year. Now, that said, if you have a 100-year storm event like what we talked about, the system itself will not have an impact, either positive or negative. It's only for the day-to-day and rainy days. If you have an extreme flood, you're talking about the system will revert back to where it initially was, because the last thing that you'd want would be for the system to have a negative impact and to cause any kind of blockages or any basement backups in the system. So what you have is the throttle lines that are there would be left fully open in an extreme event to allow maximum flow to the river, which is good you know, from the point of view of human impact, immediately as regards flooding and as regards basin backups and direct contact with E. coli. But it's going to be bad when it comes to water quality in the river. But essentially, when it comes to extreme events, like I say, the 100-year, certainly the 500-year and the 1,000-year rain events, the system would revert back to a system of disarming and basically letting nature take over, because trying to play with systems like that in extreme events, and it only happens a couple of times a year. In fact, I don't think it's probably happened at all this year that we've had to go to that. But I'm thinking about August of 16, and I'm thinking about February of 2018, and those kind of events when homes are flooding. It's just left open to get as much water out of there as possible at that time. But it is always monitored. Rest assured, it's not just left up to a computer to make all the decisions. Now, it makes the best decisions we found, but at the same time, you always have to have a human eye over these things, and that's why we have the operators continuously. And those operators pass certain item exams as well. They're not just you can't just become a wastewater treatment plant operator and start controlling these buttons and levers. You have to have certain levels and certificates to do that kind of work as well. So it's a well-regulated industry.
Thank you. I know we've taken a tour of the Hammond water plant, and there's, you know, all the different controls and everything. So
Yeah.
that was, thank you.
That's all.
Okay, there's a question.
One more question, Lisa. I don't know if you have another one or not. Did you have another one?
I have a couple here,
Lisa?
yeah. Yes, I have a couple.
Okay,
I have
go
some
ahead.
here, yeah. So there's a question about, do you have an educational component for the children and students in the area to make them aware of clean river issues and take pride in a great system? From Cheryl.
Oh, we can't hear you, Karen, but you're not muted. There's something wrong with your connection there.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
I think I muted myself accidentally by folding my arms with this on this thing here.
Uh-oh.
So we do some work in relation to that. Definitely, we've done, as I said, different stories and different work when it comes to doing like TV pieces. I have specifically myself have been a mentor with the Bowman Creek Educational Ecosystem, which facilitates interns from mostly from Riley High School in South Bend, and also some older kids as well. I've done that every year, and there's some of the kids that have worked with us in relation to doing that green infrastructure walkthrough. But as for a formal plan, educating children on this kind of work, not really. But what I would say is that if you remember, we talked about the aquatic survey that I do with the city. It's actually South Bend and Elkhart do it together. Mishawaka used to do it, which was nice because we had the whole thing across the whole stretch of our local area here, but I don't believe they do it anymore. As part of the work that we do with Elkhart, there's the main aquatic biologist there is a guy called Dara Deegan. He's also, funnily enough, he's also from Ireland, and he has a major educational component to his program, which kind of feeds into my program. So basically, what he does, and I've had him come to a couple of our public talks as well, would be he would bring fish samples. They're live and they're returned to the river afterwards, but fish samples to often to schools, and often he'll go to like fairs, state fairs, county fairs, things like that as well. So they do a lot of that. We don't specifically have an educational program tied into the long-term control plan, though. No, and it's something probably that in the future, if resources are allowing us to do, we should probably do.
Dara is awesome. I remember he did a talk with Matt Mearsman, who's also another St. Joe River guru. They were at IUSB, and Dara was talking about all the different fish and creatures that were actually in the river that nobody really knew about, and they're coming back.
Yeah, really interesting guys, very impressive. And Dara does a lot of work with schools too, and he's really good with that angle. It's a big part of his aquatics program, and South Bend supports that every year.
Yeah. Barb?
Luann wanted to know, how does the sewer system cross the river?
So the sewer system crosses the river in a number of different places in South Bend. We're actually going to make changes to some of those places as well. It crosses, for example, thinking by my house here, it crosses, I live in South Bend, I live in the North Shore Triangle. So by me, it crosses at Leaper Park, if anybody's familiar with that, it crosses under the river in a river crossing, which is like a tunnel on or just under the riverbed, parallel to Michigan Street Bridge. Then it crosses back again at Angela Bridge as well. It crosses in South Bend. In the city, we've got about 5 river crossings, but then there's some private river crossings too. For example, St. Mary's has its own river crossing. University of Notre Dame has its own river crossing as well. So basically like an underground, like a tunnel, like a culvert, anywhere between usually about like 50, maybe about 4 feet in diameter. They'll go underground and cross from one side of the river to the other. As part of the long-term control plan, we're going to mostly eliminate 2 of those crossings, and then we're going to build one other crossing as well. Because at the moment, there's a few places where we feel like it crosses unnecessarily. Each crossing is a danger, and it's an Achilles heel of a system. There's a lot of you're basically bringing the sewer system to the river, and a lot of these are old as well in South Bend. A lot of them are designed, built when the interceptor was built in the 50s. So you actually have to maintain these is very difficult. There are specialist divers, if you can believe it, that we use to go into these sewer systems and cross in the barrels themselves, in the actual river crossing barrels that are just on and mostly under the riverbeds, and they will do inspections of these as well. So there's about 10 places in South Bend where crosses. Some are private and some that they're private, but they feed into our system from the universities, and then many are used by ourselves as well. It's basically the interceptor that crosses from one side of the river to the other. So it's the last one of the city is at Angela Bridge, and then it mostly follows along under the. If anybody knows, in the city here, there's a bicycle pathway along that kind of the West Bank Trail that goes up to the treatment plant. It's kind of parallel underneath that, and then as it goes, as the river crossings move closer to the treatment plant, they get bigger. So river crossings in our system that are down near the Mishawaka side of town, the east side of town, are maybe only like a foot or 2 feet wide. But then at Angela, they come up to about 3 or 4 feet. Sorry, 4 feet. But then as the interceptor then continues on to the treatment plant, eventually it gets to 96 inches in diameter. So quite large as well. So hopefully that answers.
Thank you so much.
Another question, when will we be able to see the new plan? I wanted to know.
So the new plan is because we're at the latter stages of negotiation, it's kind of an evolving plan at the moment. So very soon, basically. But I've got an agreement in mostly kind of, well, I don't say I have an agreement because I don't have it yet, but I've got the indications that I have an agreement in principle on 99% of the plan. But we're I wouldn't say arguing, but what we're negotiating or debating at the moment is the scheduling of some of the sequencing, we'll say, of the plan. So for the moment, it means that that's evolving. But essentially what the plan is going to be green infrastructure, like I mentioned. It's going to be the building of 4 CSO storage tanks. It's going to be the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant at from 77 million gallons a day to 100. It's going to be the building of a South Shore interconnect, which is basically going to run between Leaper Park in South Bend and like the steel warehouse area by Brownfield Park, and then little bits of sewer separation here and there. But the plan will be, I wouldn't like to share it right now, just because it's still subject, during the negotiations, it's still subject to change. But as soon as we can, we will put it on the city's website at least, and hopefully we can get some interest in the media to be able to publicize this plan. Now, we'll probably do something like, I don't think everyone wants to see the nitty-gritty detail of everything, because we're talking about, a folder like 4 inches thick, but certainly like a 10-page executive summary at least. So, but it'll all be publicly available. It's just at the moment trying to make sure that we get everything, all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. Yeah.
I think maybe we put out one more last question. And that is, Rosemary was saying, predictions are that rainfall will continue to increase in the Midwest. Have you taken the possibility of much bigger rainfalls into consideration in your plans?
So
Seems like it's tricky because, it's so unpredictable.
Yeah, it's unpredictable. I showed the chart earlier where we'd had, 30 to 40 inches, and then the last 16, 17, and 18, it's been either high 50s or low 60s. So the real difficult thing about doing a long-term control plan is that you're designing for the future, but the future obviously is unknown. But we can predict at least that we expect the future to be very dramatic, at least when it comes to rainfall, based on our most recent experience. So yes, it's something that we've had a lot of success with, because the period in which we've been really trialing the smart source system, or trialing is the wrong word because it sounds like it's just been an experiment. While it's been active during some of the most dramatic years of rainfall increase. So, and it's proved its benefit while rainfall has gone from the 20s and 30s to the 60s, we've managed to get CSO from 2 billion down to number in the 300s. But it's definitely a huge unknown, and it's the big fear always, is that you're designing for something that has so much ability to change. So when you design a system, like when long-term control plans are designed, you don't just, you've got to pick a year and say, we're going to design for this year. So that's what people do. They say, we're going to pick, say, 2013 or 2018, and we're going to build a system based on that year. And then everybody has to agree, like EPA and IDEM and DOJ would have to pick a year, and they'd have to agree and say, okay, for argument's sake, let's say that every year is this year, and you try and pick an average year. So you could pick a year where, because you can't just say, you can't just, when I talk about 4 overflows, or 3 overflows or 10 overflows, it's that number of overflows for that agreed upon year. So that's what I mean. And every community has different years, and some people will try to use a year from a long time ago, and it's a very difficult thing because that year becomes so significant. If we pick 2012 as our year to, for all parties to negotiate on, it might be one thing. But if you pick 2019, it could be something else. Now 2020 might be worse. It might be worse again. The year that we picked was 1992. It was picked on for us by the regulators. It has some weird storms in 1992, which is very unfortunate, because we had, in September of 1992, we had maybe 6 10 to 100-year storms in about 3 weeks, and that's thrown our numbers off completely from 1992. Luckily, 1992 was a fairly big year, impactful. It'd be nicer to have something more recent, but that's the year that they consider to be a year that's representative of the future. There's been many years that they didn't want us to look at because they might deem it to be too favorable for us, but that's how it works.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kieran. This was great. And
Good,
thank you, everybody, for joining us. Anything else, Rosemary? We all set?
I have one more question.
One more question. All right, go for it.
I'm sorry, I don't remember who asked. Is there any other program in place to increase rain infiltration, rain gardens, permeable pavement? I didn't know if that would be part of that program or not.
It's part of this. So if you remember, I mentioned previously that the city has these 35 CSO basins, and we've deemed that 9 of these basins are viable areas for green infrastructure, 3 of those in particular. So the areas that will be rolling out more intensive green infrastructure would be in South Bend. And I'm sorry if I'm using names here, places that people aren't familiar with, but basically the area in and around between Leaper Park and Memorial Hospital and the Riverside, and that side of Riverside Drive along there, much of downtown, and then the area down, if anybody's familiar with I refer to parts of the city in relation to the sewer. So I'm thinking, if anybody's familiar with the area of the Crooked U Brewery down there as well, opposite the Farmers Market in South Bend, there's a lot of impact there, and further south and east, there will be potential for green infrastructure in those areas there too. It'll all fall under this long-term control plan. Yeah. Now, one of the key things with the long-term control plan has been that we are not just doing plans that are specifically part of the long-term control plan, part of the consent decree, but also making sure that every other city project gets green infrastructure. So for example, if people are familiar with the Smart Streets work that was completed in South Bend back in the summers of like 16 and 17, all the permeable pavers that were put down there, they're all green infrastructure, and that was all done. And we spent, there was over $2 million spent on that work down there, not on the overall aspect, but on the green infrastructure aspect to keep rainfall out of the sewer system. And there's been more work done over in the East Village area as well, over by Howard Park as well on that. So there's 2 parts of it. One is making sure that on specific long-term control plan projects, we've got specific plans that are led by me and my office to get green infrastructure into the community, but also making sure that we sneak it in where possible into all the other plans. So if somebody is, for example, I think now, anytime somebody's doing some road improvements, it creates an opportunity for us to do not just green infrastructure, but to do some sewer separation too. So around Western Avenue the last couple of years, there's been some road improvements over there. And we've also been able to make sure that while you've got the street dug up, would now be a good time for us to put in a second pipe along with that first pipe and that's kind of work was great because it doesn't really cost my project a lot of money because it's already been done under somebody else's regime, so that's kind of good. But looking for opportunities and then also leading certain opportunities as well.
Great.
Thank you so much. So
Nice
enjoyed it.
All right. Well, thank you again, everybody. Don't forget, we're going to have an online auction coming up. And we have our president is here. Did you want to say anything, Krista, as a farewell for today, or encourage people to come tomorrow?
Well, I think you just did. I'd like to thank you, Karen. I thought your talk was extremely interesting, and thank you for everyone for joining us. And thanks for all the organizers who took all the pressure off of me that I didn't have to do anything today. So I hope to see you all tomorrow.
See you all tomorrow.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. It was an honor to be here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Kieran.
Thanks. Bye.
Great to have you.
Bye.
Out.
Thanks, Rosemary.
Oh, thank you. Let me unmute. I want to unmute. Let's see. How do I do that?
Joy?
Yeah, I was trying to. There we go. I'm going to unmute Joy, and Linda's still here, and Mary Jo and Trisha. Give them permission to unmute if they wish.
Hey, Joy.
Hi, how are you, Lisa?
Good. How are you?
Great, thanks. Great program.
Glad you enjoyed it.
He was
As
charming.
Dave said, who doesn't enjoy listening to him?
Right. I had a feeling that would be popular.
So, no, really, exciting technology.
It's so hard to articulate it too, because it's, it's artificial intelligence. And when I first heard that, I was like, what do you mean artificial intelligence in the sewer system? And it's just so cool to see how they, are able to utilize more of the system more efficiently, and how much that can, save in dollars for a municipality in the meantime anyway, and
Well,
really make some.
Yeah, and what's great about it is it's an alternative to just building more pipes, reservoirs, and larger systems. Because you can't outbuild this. The problem, and to separate out. I mean, we've been dealing, for 50 years trying to deal with CSOs, and it's with this old legacy infrastructure, it's really virtually impossible to do it. You can't unring the bell, but here you can really evolve the system so that it's much more cost effective and effective.
Yeah, I see it buying some time for some municipalities, and also just, like I said to him, the creative component to this was just, it's so cool to hear how much there's a lot going on here in South Bend, and just